Republican-controlled House of Representatives voted unanimously, except for Massey. It was 217 to 212, if I remember correctly, on the passage of a budget resolution. And let me just walk you through very briefly what a budget resolution is, A, and B, why you should not confuse it with the government shutdown. The budget resolution essentially is a broad outline of how much money they want to cut from Americans and our government, and how much they want to cut in taxes, primarily for wealthy people. And that's basically it. Incidentally, I know how much Donald Trump was the anti-war candidate, and finally, America first. We're not going to get involved in things. This budget calls for a meager $10 billion additional each year for defense spending. I guarantee you when it hits the Senate, it goes up. But there is no cut associated with this. This budget resolution is not anywhere close to what the final thing will be. It's the easiest part of the process for the Republicans, though there is some surprise they were able to do this. But I think I said yesterday, they just want to move the chains, as it were, and that's it. They just want to move downfield, but they really have no plan to go anywhere after their own 30 or 40 yard line. The Senate still has their two-bill plan. Now what happens is, in the House, they have broad strokes. So they haven't said cut $800 billion from Medicaid quite yet. They have just tasked the Energy and Commerce Committee to make $880 billion in cuts. And there's no way for them to do that without making massive, massive cuts to Medicaid. Remember, 70 million Americans rely on Medicaid for health insurance, including almost 2/3 of the people living in nursing homes. And nearly 40% of babies born in this country. They also have instructed the Agriculture Committee to find $230 billion in cuts. There is no way they can find those cuts without deep, deep cuts to the SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Food stamps. Those are the two big sort of areas in which they're cutting. I mean, they're cutting in a bunch of other places. That's only, I've just enumerated about $1.1 trillion in cuts, and they're supposedly getting another $900 billion in cuts out of the budget. Unclear right now where those are going to come from. And the whole thing is that the problem the Republicans have is they desperately want at least $4.5 trillion, this is over a course of 10 years, of tax cuts. In fact, $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, according to the people who have sort of done the back of the envelope stuff via David Dayen, is probably even too low a number because they want to extend the Trump tax cuts, make those permanent for corporations and rich people, with a tiny sliver of the tax cuts going to low-income people, middle-income people.
That they'll immediately pay to their landlord.
The tax cuts, understand, the Trump tax cuts for the people in the top 10 percentile, maybe it's even the top 5 percentile, was 3 times higher as a percentage than for low income. So obviously, yes, if you get a tax cut and you're a millionaire, you're going to be paying more. You're going to be getting a lot more, more money than if someone gets that same amount of tax cut and they only make $40,000 a year. But as a percentage too, it was 3 times higher. 60% of the value of the tax cuts went to the top 5%. And he wants to add to that, both on the wealthy and corporate side, and then do stuff like supposedly not tipping overtime. Now, he wants to close, he said, the carried interest loophole, which is when hedge fund guys, they don't get taxed at like a income rate. They get taxed at a capital gains rate, even though it's not their money. They manage other people's money. And for whatever reason, because of this loophole, they get taxed at the same rate as the people who make money, that they make money for in capital gains. But for them, it's not their capital gains, it's just their work. So what's going to happen is he's going to close that loophole, and then he's going to say, actually, if you're a hedge funder, it's like a tip. You get a certain percentage of what you make for your clients, and it's tax-free because it's a tip. 15% for your meal. I always do 20% of former waiter, sometimes 25%. And so you get it. It's tax-free. That's the plan. So that is the budget resolution. But understand, ultimately, this has to be reconciled with whatever is happening in the Senate. And don't confuse that word reconcile with this being ultimately a reconciliation bill. Reconciliation bill just means that it doesn't need more than 50% plus one in both houses. And they'll get 2 bites at the apple if they want on the reconciliation. The Senate wants to split it up. Tax cuts in one thing, expenditures on the border and for defense in the other thing. They want to separate those 2 things because they know if they tie them together, they're going to run into problems with the people who pretend like they care about the deficit and the debt. Because it's going to obviously increase our deficit and debt by trillions of dollars, which they have to both pretend to care about, but don't really care about. So they're going to have problems with this. And this is going to be like literally a year-long process, maybe going into the fall, and maybe, I don't know what the deadline is for reconciliation, but at the very least, it's going to happen over the next 6 or 7 months. In the meantime, we're 13 days away now, 16 days away from a government shutdown. And they're going to try and pass a continuing resolution of the existing budget we have. They don't have time to come up with a new budget. They just agreed on these broad strokes yesterday. And the real question is, are Democrats going to help them with this continuing resolution? And the answer should be a 100% unequivocal no until Trump agrees that he does not have the right to exercise what we call impoundment or a line item veto. If Congress appropriates the money, the president is bound and the agencies are bound to expend that money. And so that's what we're going to see over the next 13 days. We're turning away from what happened with that budget resolution and now going to look towards the continuing resolution for the numbers that we have now. And one other note, that budget contained a $20 billion cut to IRS. And it was a future cut, right? Because remember, there was $80 billion given to the IRS over the course of 10 years. $20 billion was cut in that first, was pulled back in the last Biden negotiations. But it's in the budget. So it would be cut again. And they've already cut a bunch of IRS people. And remember, whenever they cut the IRS, the first thing that happens, every dollar that is cut, reduces audits of wealthy people, because that's the most expensive place. So hopefully the Democrats will hold strong and, like they did yesterday, and not help with the continuing resolution and get out there and start messaging the Republicans are about to shut down the government. The Republicans are about to shut down the government. The Republicans are about to shut down the government because they refuse to agree to our constitutional order. We'll see. In the meantime, they're trying to pretend like they're not cutting Medicaid because they realize, like, hey, this is a problem. 70 million Americans, some of those live in red states. In fact, a whole lot of them do. Here is North Carolina Republican Addison McDowell saying, we're going to find a fraud and abuse. We're not going to actually do any cutting.
Of cuts on the Republican side is the $2 trillion cut. Some Congress people have concerns that it could ensnare Medicaid. Congressman Don Bacon, for example, saying he wants to advance Trump's agenda on national security, energy, and taxes, but doesn't want to make significant cuts to Medicaid. It's not explicitly laid out in this blueprint, but it could be affected. Are you confident?
Pause it. Let me just make this clear again. It's not explicitly laid out in this blueprint, but, you know, I have a cup of liquid IV here. And if you tell me to empty out 3/4 of that cup, well, let's say I had an eighth of coffee and the rest of it is liquid IV, and you tell me to empty out 3/4 of this cup, guess what? A bunch of it's going to be the liquid IV. No. So this isn't laid out specifically, but you cannot get $880 billion from that committee's portfolio without cutting hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicaid. It's impossible.
Or like the Egg Committee is going to be SNAP.
100%.
Explicitly laid out in this blueprint, but it could be affected. Are you confident that this blueprint wouldn't lead to any cuts in Medicaid?
I'm confident that there's waste, fraud, and abuse in our government and every system that we have, and that's what we're looking to find.
Does that include
I think
Medicaid?
There's not a single. If there is waste, fraud, and abuse in any program, we need to find it.
So that includes, just to be clear, sorry, a little bit of a delay, but to be clear, if there's waste, fraud, and abuse as you've described it in Medicaid, that would be something you would be supportive of looking at?
Absolutely. If there's waste, fraud, and abuse in anything, I can't imagine there's a single American that wouldn't want us to go and find that.
Okay, go find the waste, fraud, and abuse. But how are you going to do that? Are you going to sit in your office in Congress and go, we're going to call up every single and we're going to check through this? No, what you do is you hire more investigators at the DOJ or at CMS, HHS investigators to go look for more fraud and abuse. That fraud and abuse, incidentally, like we talked about yesterday, comes from providers. They have done extensive research on this, and they have done extensive, actually, prosecutions of people who have committed fraud, Medicaid fraud. And it's not people who are going around pretending that they're on Medicaid and they shouldn't be. It is people who are defrauding Medicaid by charging them for stuff that they haven't done. Medical device providers, ambulance companies, nursing homes, you name it. Providers, not beneficiaries. Here is AOC at that very same committee, House Energy and Commerce Committee hearing. This was from earlier that day, yesterday, I should say, outlining that they're full of it.
But that's the argument, right? But if that were true, then one would think that the so-called cost savings from certain wasteful cuts would be reinvested in Medicaid. However, that is not what the committee is proposing. They are proposing that we have cuts to these essential programs in order to pay for Elon Musk's tax breaks. The order has come down to this committee. Find $880 billion. Find it for what? To pay for a tax cut bill that benefits tax cuts on yachts and private jets and billionaires and mega corporations, while secretaries and working class people pay higher effective tax rates than Facebook does. Undocumented immigrants in this country pay more in taxes than many large corporations do. And so the argument here that these cuts need to be for the sustainability of Medicaid doesn't really make sense when you realize that these cuts are being just moved to justify expenditures and deficit spending in another area.
Yeah, if you thought there was waste, fraud, and abuse, and the only way to save Medicaid was to cut that waste, fraud, and abuse, and there was a magic button where you could be like, oh, we're just going to, these people at Medicaid, put in a line item, waste, and one's fraud, and one's abuse. We're just going to cut those. Then you would reinvest it into the program, into non-waste, fraud, and abuse. But again, their whole argument is, well, if there's 10% fraud in Medicaid, the way that we deal with that is by cutting Medicaid by 10%. It's absurd. If you have 10% of your inventory in your store is being shoplifted, the solution is not to cut down your inventory by 10 or 20%.
Yeah. If there's occasional immigrant crime, it doesn't mean you do mass deportations.
That's what we're looking at. And we'll see how far Democrats go in terms of being able to exploit this for political purposes. Hopefully, we're going to see ads running in Republican districts, purple districts tomorrow. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.